Estonia, 2007. A man attempts to use his laptop to check his bank account, but he finds the website unresponsive. Across the street, a woman tries to pay for her gas with a debit card, but the point-of-sale system just hangs. Elsewhere, the email servers of Estonia's largest banking organization, Hansabank, collapse. A general unease begins to spread. Cybersecurity analysts working for the Estonian government and affected businesses begin to piece together what's happening. Estonia is under a distributed denial of service attack of unprecedented size. For 22 days, Kremlin-backed hacktivists pound key elements of Estonia's financial infrastructure. To protect their networks, the Estonian government stops allowing foreign internet connections into Estonia, rendering the country effectively offline to the rest of the world. When the dust finally settles, the financial damage is significant. However, direct damage to Estonia's economy is not the Russian operation's only goal. As the NATO Stratcom report later says, the operation also possesses a significant psychological function, hoping to sow confusion, fear, and uncertainty in users of attacked systems. In other words, a major goal of the Russian attack was rhetorical. Denial of service actions, or DOS actions, are used by governments, activist groups, organized crime, and businesses every day. DOS is a rhetorical affordance found in every networked digital electronic computer system, or DEC, ever built and that perhaps ever will be built. This sounds like an overstatement, but it really isn't. DOS as rhetoric is an affordance in everything from the point-of-sale system at your local cafe, to a Predator drone, to a Tesla car, to your laptop, to, as Hugh Salas suggests, quantum computers. Name a networked DEC and I will show you a system where DOS as a rhetorical affordance can be found. This can't be said for most other forms of digital rhetoric, as they rely on the arbitrary programming of the DEC from which they come and in which they attain their vibrancy. DOS, on the other hand, does not rely on the arbitrary program of a DEC and can be found in all networked DECs, making it akin to something almost like a universal digital rhetoric. This video breaks down into 3 sections. First, I discuss how the arbitrary programming of DEC systems results in rhetorical affordances and artifacts that are necessarily entangled in the arbitrary programs they both come from and exist in. Second, I provide a technical description of DOS and DDoS to demonstrate how they are not dependent on arbitrary programming. A holistic digital rhetoric should be founded on the fundamental similarities that all DECs share. Orienting research around these affordances allows one to create a more stable body of digital rhetorical theory that is not dependent on ever-shifting arbitrary programming. At the core of every DEC is the microprocessor. A very simple description of a microprocessor is that it is an electronic circuit that moves electrons through an array of transistors in order to perform calculations. One important thing to note about microprocessors is that they can only do so many calculations over a certain time frame. By and large, this is determined by the number of transistors in the circuit and how they are arranged. Intel's i9-2900K is likely the world's fastest consumer microprocessor. The amount of calculations Intel's chip can perform a second is staggering, but it's ultimately limited. The second important thing to note about microprocessors is that all digital artifacts and affordances are the result of calculations within microprocessors. DECs are defined by their status as effectively complete universal computers. A universal computer, in a very simplified sense, is a machine that can perform any arbitrary calculation on any arbitrary input. That's what makes DEC systems so useful. They can be programmed to perform any arbitrary task that can be abstracted into something calculable within a microprocessor. What this means for rhetoric is this. Since a DEC's functions are arbitrary, any rhetorical affordance or artifact that comes from the arbitrary program of a DEC can only exist within similarly programmed DECs. If you've ever tried to run an old program on a new computer, then you can get a feel for what I mean. When the arbitrary program of a DEC shifts, which is the major affordance of all DECs, rhetorical affordances and artifacts disappear and emerge. The data a DEC calculates and a user's relative ability to read and write that data are arbitrarily programmed. The interface through which one interacts with the data and process is arbitrary at the software level and largely arbitrary at the hardware level. The processes that underpin interactions with DECs are also arbitrary. One only needs to look at the debates surrounding social media recommendation algorithms and radicalization to see how malleable these things are. Before moving into the next section, I want to discuss a few DECs. Here are a few. Commodore 64s, Predator drones, Teslas, my Acer laptop, nuclear power plant control consoles, remote insulin monitors, ThinkBooks, and MetaQuest headsets. The rhetorical affordances and artifacts present in any one of these DECs may not exist in another. There may be some overlap, but that one will find the same affordances in System A and System B is not a given. However, in all of these systems, the affordance of DOS can be found. The reason for this is that DOS doesn't require specific arbitrary calculations. DOS only requires that calculation happens at all. When a DEC, called the client, attempts to connect to another DEC, called the server, the client must make a request for data. When the server receives that request, it must use some of its inherently limited computational power to process that request, locate the requested data, and format that data for transmission back to the client. For simple requests of static content, the computational power needed is small, but it's still non-negligible. Complex requests for dynamic content require more processing power. The specific protocols by which requests take place are arbitrary. What is not arbitrary, though, is that some computation, some calculation, in whatever form, must take place to facilitate the connection between client and server. Since microprocessors can only do so many calculations in a time frame, the amount of connections a server can process in the same time frame is inherently limited. This is true of all networked DECs. DOS and DDoS take advantage of this material reality. To perform a denial of service action, a client makes more requests than the server can process. This overwhelms the server, and it either crashes or becomes unable to handle legitimate client requests, because it's so bogged down by the attacker's requests. The easiest way to mitigate a DOS attack is to simply ban or ignore the offending client's requests. A distributed denial of service, or DDoS, sidesteps this mitigation tactic by making many requests from many clients distributed across the network. This makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the server's administrator to differentiate between attacking clients and regular clients. This is different from most other forms of cyber attack. Unlike exploits, which take advantage of unforeseen functions in arbitrary programming, or social engineering attacks which take advantage of human behavior, DOS and DDoS take advantage of the fundamental electromechanical construction of microprocessors. To perform a client-server connection, the microprocessors of both the client and the server must expend some of their limited computational power. When this limit is surpassed, the DEC will stop working as intended. DOS and DDoS cannot be patched, only contingently mitigated, since they are not the result of arbitrary calculations. DOS and DDoS are a result of the, as far as we know it, unchangeable laws of physics and information theory to describe how electrons move through transistors. As long as we use DEC systems powered by microprocessors, which move electrons through transistors in order to do calculations, DOS and DDoS will be present as rhetorical affordances. The rhetoric of DOS and DDoS has been well discussed. In this slide, you can see a few examples of this. Molly Souther provides what is likely the most in-depth discussion of the rhetorics of DDoS and DOS. For Souther, the absence of a presence in the network is itself rhetorical. They write that servers become representative static containers, which maintain an occupying presence on the network even as their content and functionality is pushed offline by the force of DDoS. Souther continues, that presence remains in the non-responsive yet still labeled blankness of the server's absence. This absence, Souther argues, becomes a presence that is still very much an occupying informatic structure online. In other words, the sudden absence of a DEC system in the network demands attention. The server may no longer be there, but the gap left by its sudden absence has significant rhetorical effect. When Russian actors or Anonymous or anyone else performs a DOS or DDoS action, they are leveraging a non-arbitrary aspect of DEC systems. They have limited computational power, and some of this power must be expended to facilitate network connections. Since this is not arbitrary, but the result of the construction of microprocessors at an atomic level, DOS and DDoS is a fundamental rhetorical affordance found in any DEC that is networked to another DEC. Look around you. Count the things that you see that have a microprocessor inside of them, which talk to another thing with a microprocessor. The rhetorical affordance of DOS and DDoS is there. DOS and DDoS are as universal of a rhetoric as one is likely to find. It does not rely on symbolic systems like language. It does not rely on a DEC's ability to use certain modalities. It does not rely on what a designer intends for a system to do. It only requires that a microprocessor attempt to talk to another microprocessor, which all network DECs do. The thing that makes DEC systems so helpful is that they can be programmed to do any arbitrary calculation. This also means that the arbitrary programming of DECs is constantly shifting. A lot of digital rhetoric from the earlier days of the field is no longer particularly useful. I'm thinking of hypertext theory, which Michelle Kendrick calls a dead end. The reason that hypertext theory is a dead end is that the common arbitrary, the sort of topoi of programming, have shifted from the 90s to today. Or perhaps in the case of hypertext theory, they never really materialized like the theorists thought. Either way, the DECs of the 80s and 90s are very different from the DECs of today. The DECs of today will likely be nothing like the DECs 30 years from now. When Lanham invented the term digital rhetoric, he wasn't talking about every DEC holistically. He was only talking about the rhetorics of specific DECs with certain arbitrary topoi of programming. Rhetorical affordances like the one revealed by DOS and DDoS do not emerge from the arbitrary programming of a DEC, but occur due to its non-arbitrary electromechanical construction. Processors must move electrons through transistors to calculate, and calculation is a must for networking. Thus, the affordance of DOS and DDoS is present in every network DEC that has ever existed and likely ever will exist. As long as the computer's means of doing calculations involves moving electrons through transistors, the rhetorical affordance of DOS will be there. The general research orientation in digital rhetoric tends to assume a stability of arbitrary programs. This orientation is great for explicating the rhetoric of things that exist within those arbitrary programs. However, the arbitraries of yesterday are not the arbitraries of today, and the arbitraries of today will not be the arbitraries of tomorrow. To develop a holistic, long-term theory of digital rhetoric, one must account for all DECs, present, past, and future, in their many myriad forms. DOS, and fundamental functions like it which do not depend on arbitrary programming, offer a way to cut across all DECs and uncover what affordances are available in all of them. My name is Chris Turpin. Thank you for listening.